In this episode of Escaping the Rabbit Hole, my guest reveals how cult leaders brainwash people with psychological puzzles. Can you guess what one of these puzzles is? Keep listening to find out.
Welcome to Escaping the Rabbit Hole, hosted by former conspiracy theorist Antonio Perez, author of Converting Conspiracy Theorists. Antonio looks at conspiracy theories from multiple angles, such as how do conspiracy theorists impact their family and friends? How can they escape the grip of conspiracy theories? And why do they fall down the rabbit hole in the first place? You'll discover strategies to set clear boundaries with people stuck in dangerous conspiracy theories and improve your mental well-being. Here's your host, Antonio Perez.
Aloha, it's Antonio with escapingtherabbithole.com. Today I have a very special guest. Every time I always say very special guest, but this one has a warm spot in my heart. First met him out here in Hawaii a few years ago. Guest is Damon Cart. I know him from the hypnosis community, or not so. I mean, I don't know if you really identify with yourself in the hypnosis community so much.
Not as much, but I have been trained in hypnosis, and I actually I kind of becoming a regular at the hypnosis UK hypnosis convention in London. So I just got accepted again there. So
Nice.
I'll be there in November. Yeah, it's probably November.
And
So I'm good with the hypnotist.
yeah, and let me ask. I think let me see if I've got a good gauge on this. I think the reason that you don't quite identify with the hypnosis community is because there are some batshit crazy people in the hypnosis community.
Well, I never that wasn't the reason. However, I went to James Tripp.
Yeah.
Yeah, great guy. I got to see him in London this last time that I was there, and I hadn't seen him in been a few years. And he's one of those guys, I just hit it off with. It doesn't matter how many years pass. Like when I see him, it's like we have these great conversations.
He seems very level-headed.
Very level-headed, yeah. He was teaching a hypnosis convention post hypnothoughts, like when they have the convention, or they have the workshops afterward. So I flew out to Vegas because I wanted to meet him. We had been corresponding back and forth. He was commenting on my videos, I was commenting on his videos, and so yeah, I went, met him. We shot some videos together, and during like breaks on while he was teaching, I'd go with the other attendees
I
to
remember
lunch.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, and man, just to listen to these conversations, and I was just like, have you guys just totally taken a step off like the reality train? And what train did you jump on? And
Was it the ghost thing?
the ghost story. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was just like, so this lady was, just telling us how there was a ghost in her room, and she knew it because she felt it sit on her bed and all these things. And I was just like, okay, what makes you jump to the conclusion that it was a dead person who came back and sat on your bed? Like, of all the things
Yeah.
that it could possibly be, anything from muscle spasms to, okay, let's say it's paranormal. Why a dead person? Like, I don't, how do you jump to this conclusion? And man, everybody just kind of stopped and looked at me, and it was like, oh, I just farted in their faces is basically what it
Because you weren't in the in group.
I was not in the in group, and I put myself out real fast like that. And so we got on to like, they were, pushing back on it. And I was like, there was the guy, the Israeli guy, what's his name? Who for a long time deceived people about his paranormal abilities.
I used to
Yuri
believe that when I
Geller.
was a kid. Yeah, when I was a kid, I believe. Yeah, Yuri Geller. Yeah.
Yuri Geller. And so they were talking about psychic. I mean, this conversation went off the rails for sure. And so I brought up Yuri Geller because right at that time, like he had just come out and admitted that he had faked everything. And so I was like, okay, that guy was so convincing that he actually convinced scientists. And it wasn't until the Amazing Randy came out and was saying like, no, he's not for real, and he won't face me because he knows I will expose him. And they were like, but don't you know that, the Amazing Randy, when he would challenge these people, like he made it impossible for them to ever succeed. And I was like, why? Because he was looking at them and he knew their tricks. It was like, so anyway, by the time we were done with that conversation, people were upset with me. And I wasn't trying to be like mean or, I was just like, before we jump off the cliff, why don't we just talk about it a little bit and just say like, what makes you think this or what makes you think that? And they weren't having it.
Hypnotists of all people should know that.
You would think.
And the one thing that boggles my mind is and I think this might come from like some of the stuff from Bandler. Or let me no, maybe no, okay, let's not pull that in. But you know the idea of hypnotists like, oh, the more you focus on something, you get more of it. You know, you buy a red car, see a red car. It's very
Right.
everybody knows that.
Mm.
So it boggles my mind when hypnotists are sitting there freaking out, wondering why they see conspiracy theories everywhere. I'm like, I can tell you why, but you got a blind spot. And in regards to that, to the lady that thought there was a ghost sitting on her bed. I'm not sure if you ever heard there's a phenomenon in the South. You know what sleep paralysis is? I'm sure you do.
Yep. Yep.
In the South, they call it witches sit. I've heard of some African Americans talking about how people think like there's a witch sitting on you because you're in that sleep paralysis. So that could
Mhm.
have. I mean, there's so many different possibilities.
Sure.
Have you been exposed to street epistemology?
I don't think so.
Oh man, you're the go get this book, How to Have Impossible Conversations. Peter Boghossian, he wrote two books, Manual for Creating Atheists and Street Epistle and How to Have Impossible Conversations. It's basically a methodology of how to help people understand how they got to believe what they believe.
Mm.
Phenomenal. Oh, I'm telling you, you get those books, you're gonna love them.
That does sound good.
So your website is selfconcept.com.
Yep.
Now, can you give people a brief background into I guess who you are and how you came to what you do?
Sure. Um, so I've recently outed myself. I used to tell everyone that the very first NLP experience I ever had was a professor in college, and that is a true story. But previous to that, and I'm comfortable saying this now because I just did a video with him a few months ago, back in October. My first encounter with NLP, other than Tony Robbins, but I don't really count that because I was just listening to the tapes and I wasn't really doing much with them. My dad had them, and so there's a little bit of indirect NLP there, but I wouldn't call that an NLP experience. But I was in college. I was very lonely. I was a freshman, and I felt like everybody else in the world was partying and having a good time and dating and all that. It turned out that was not true, but I thought it was true. And the internet was very new at this time, and I was amazed by how you could pretty much look up anything and find information on it, which plays into what you do in the whole conspiracy thing, because that's
Yeah.
what people are doing. But I looked up how to meet women and that whole thing, and
And
Ross Jeffers
you found
popped
that.
up.
Yep, I knew. I was gonna say you found the curly haired guy. Yeah.
But his hair was very short at that time.
Yeah.
You couldn't even tell he had curly hair because he kept it so short. Uh, yeah, so I didn't. I was reading over it, and I was very broke because I didn't have a job, and I was a college student. And I reached out to my brother. And I said, "Hey, this looks pretty interesting. Would you split the cost on this with me because I can't afford it?" And he goes, "Oh, he's using an LP." And I was like, "What's that?" And so he's like, "Well, that's what Tony Robbins does." And I was like, "Okay, well, that kind of made it sound more legitimate." Um, so we bought the course. I memorized everything in it, and then I went and tried it, and it worked. And I couldn't believe how effective it was. And I was like, man, this NLP stuff is pretty amazing. And then later I found out that there was a professor at the same university that I was attending who taught a course called the philosophy of psychology. Now, I wouldn't count myself as an NLP practitioner at that time. All I had done is memorize a few techniques and some scripts, and I was just making them work. I didn't understand how it worked, and I couldn't really apply it anywhere else in my life. So I attend this class with this professor, and he's amazing. And when he was doing demonstrations, he hypnotized people. We did all kinds of things. We learned about Gestalt. We learned how to hypnotize each other in class. And then at the end, he was like, okay, this is the mother of them all. This is NLP. And I didn't understand it. Like when he explained it, he was a very good teacher, but I just didn't quite grasp it. But after I graduated college, it's about, I don't know, maybe 2 years after that, I took his class. I fell into a depression. 9/11 had just happened. I had several things happen back to back, and I was just down. And I had no health insurance. I was a bartender at the time, and I thought I really need help, but I can't afford it. And then I thought about my professor, and I reached out to him and said, "Hey, I'm in a bad situation. I don't know what to do. Can you help me out here?" And he said, "Yeah, come to my office." We talked it out a little bit. The first time I met with him, it was not an actual session. And he said, okay, one more thing. I don't believe in a free service, but I don't need your money either. So every time you come to me, you donate money to charity or you donate time for community service. Deal? And I was like, deal. Showed up the next week, one session, less than an hour, depression was gone. Blew my mind. And I remember just thinking, I was in film, I had just graduated film school and I was focusing on a film career, but I was like, oh man, I want to learn this NLP stuff. Like that was amazing. And it just didn't make any sense to me because I was like, you hear, it takes months and months to come out of depression. And I was like, I had been suffering for almost a year. And in one session, it was over. And I was like, I was even wondering, is this going to last? Is this just like a little technique, like an anchor he did? And it was like, it lasted and jump forward 10 years later.
Something I want to interject, just
Sure.
so people understand that, sometimes, I mean, my depression is so much better. I get like little bits here and there. I'm able to manage it. Um, I'm gonna, I don't want to attack Damon's position, but like hypnosis NLP is great for changing moods and everything, but sometimes it takes a longer intervention. And I know Erickson sometimes would do longer interventions.
That's a really good point that you're making. I don't want people to come take on the expectation that, oh, if you just do an NLP technique, it should wrap it up in one session. It doesn't always work that way.
You,
Uh,
I can add something to that real quick. I know you're familiar with core transformation. The first time I used it once to like I think stop smoking for about a week, and then I had another time when I was having these nightmares of like a girl being killed and body parts in the car. So I remember like talking to my mom. She said, "Oh, our neighbor was killed when we were." I was like, "Oh shit!" So I did core transformation because I used to have this horrible fear. If I was in the bathroom, if I turn off the light, I'd have this panic. I almost feel a little bit of the feeling now, but or if I was walking by a window in our house and it was dark, I almost felt like somebody was following me. It was throughout my life, I had these like fears, like, oh, there might be a serial killer, just always terrified. So I did core transformation. The first time I did it, I remember getting this feeling of wholeness. It felt very psychedelic, that kind of oneness feeling. Problem gone. Like I cannot pull. So what happened at the time, I thought like, wow, core transformation, it's a silver bullet. It'll work on everything, which isn't the case. I've
Mhm.
been able to use a lot of stuff, but sometimes it takes a lot more work to do it.
Yeah, so I don't want people to think that you can always cure everything in one session. And for whatever reason, it worked for me that one time. And it's also but it does go to show you that you can overcome something rapidly. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily take a long time. So yeah, I remember thinking that like one of these days I need to learn this NLP stuff. And yeah, not long after that, I moved to Los Angeles and I was trying to make the whole film thing work. That never really worked. And then I couldn't. We thought about moving back to New Orleans, but the hurricane had just hit, the big one, Hurricane Katrina, and I had kids at the time, and I was like, I'm not bringing my kids back to that, and the crime was horrible, and I was like, we got to stay in California, but I want to get out of LA and I want to do something different. I was working at a computer software company, and my dad is an insurance agent still to this day. And so I started looking into that, and I saw that there was an opening for this company that my dad works for, that there was an opening in Santa Cruz. Now, the only thing I knew about Santa Cruz up to this point was I got lost on the way to Big Sur and ended up in Santa Cruz for about an hour. So that was the only knowledge I had of Santa Cruz. And when I saw that there was an opening, I just knew. I was like, we're going to Santa Cruz. It was,
You're in the hot spot of NLP
and
in
I didn't
Santa
even know
Cruz.
it. And I didn't even
Yes.
know it. And this is where, you go synchronicity. Like this is, I don't know. I don't know what to call it, but it was pretty amazing. I didn't even know that NLP had been created here. Uh, and I was en route to move here. Like everything was set, had already taken the position. We were, had a scheduled move, everything, we rented a place, all that. And then I found out that it was where NLP started. And I was just like, that's too weird. And I was like, okay, well, now I'm gonna really learn NLP. There's gonna probably be an NLP institute on every corner. And then I get here and it's like, no NLP. Like it was crickets.
I
And
thought that when I was gonna move out to Hawaii, I should have been trained when I was in Michigan. I'm like, oh my God, Hawaii's a healing place. But I'm like, no.
so, and it wasn't until I was at, I'd started my insurance office and I had already acquired a book of business. And this couple comes in, and the wife was from New Orleans, and I was like, "Hey, I'm from New Orleans too." So we really hit it off. And the guy was there. He was kind of interesting, but he was kind of kept quiet. And then and so I finally said, "How did you two meet?" And he says, "Oh, I was teaching an NLP workshop in New Orleans." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, where is everybody?" And he didn't want to get into it, but it really, the whole Bandler thing, really, the whole Bandler murder thing, that he
Kinda,
was acquitted for, left Santa Cruz with a very bad, very sour taste in everyone's
yeah,
mouths. And in fact, they wouldn't even sell NLP books in bookstores here, like when that happened. So it was a big deal, and
yeah.
people just wanted to put it behind them, and that's probably why NLP in Santa Cruz didn't flourish. But eventually, I discovered that they had NLP University happening up at the campus, the UCSC campus every summer.
Was that album?
No, that's Dilts and Deloger,
Okay.
Judith Deloger and Robert Dilts. And so I did train with Halbum up in San Francisco though. That's where I got started. I mean, actually I hit another depression, and I was pretty sure that my professor had retired. He was kind of up in age even when I was there. And yeah, I just didn't feel right about reaching out to him or trying to find him. And a lot of times, most people had to leave New Orleans after the hurricane, and then they were hard to locate after that. So I was just like, I'll just do regular therapy. It took me a year of regular therapy to come out of that depression. And so, of course, my mind was on like, okay, that took a year. Whereas with my professor who did NLP with me, took one session. I need to learn NLP. And that was when I decided for my mental health and, for my business and for my marriage, which was on the rocks, was failing, eventually did fall apart. So I started doing NLP training, and I was just hooked. Like, and I practiced every single day. I kept jumping into, if there was a practitioner training happening near me, I would go and I would enroll and attend that. And my life started changing pretty fast. And then it was master practitioner training, NLP University. A lot of bad things were going on in my life at the time. And I almost canceled that training. And a friend of mine said, "No, I think, Damon, this is actually what you really need to do.
You need this.
That you need this." And I was like, "You know what? You're right." And I stuck with it. And during that training was when I realized the things that were making me miserable, my marriage and my business, and both of them needed to go. And so that, you build, when you don't really understand yourself, you don't understand what your true values are, you end up building things up, and you build these structures in your life, a marriage, a family, a business, perhaps. And then when you finally do understand who you are and what you want, sometimes you have to let those things crumble, or you have to destroy them, so that you can make way for new things.
Okay, cool. Now I know how I can take the direction of this podcast. I know you're good at you can definitely talk on boundaries. First, I want to boundaries and the idea of values. First, I want to ask you a couple questions. I know you're in an interesting camp because you do have some conspiracy theorists in your family,
Yes.
and you're familiar with some mental health, some tools to help people.
Mm.
So I want to take this in the direction of first ask you a couple questions and maybe give some family members, give tools to family members of conspiracy theorists, like how can I create more harmony, because I don't want to focus on how to convert a
I don't know if I'm
conspiracy
the right
theorist.
person for that. I saw a meme on Facebook that said something like, usually the black sheep of a family is just the one who sees through the bullshit. And I would say that that's me. In fact,
Okay.
so my wife is from Romania. We had some issues with immigration during the pandemic. We got separated. She couldn't come back here. And so the only way that we could see each other is by both meeting in a country that we could both get into. After we got married, then I could at least get into Romania. But anyway, she had met my parents once and my brother, and it was brief, and we quickly moved on. So when she was finally able to come back, when she got her green card, we went out to visit my parents, and we were there for a few days. And when we came back, she was like, "Wow," she's like, "You've had to work really hard just to be you." And I
Yeah.
was like, "Yeah." And she said, "Okay, well, you're definitely the black sheep." And I was like, "Well, I didn't quite think of myself that way." My younger brother, who died of a drug overdose, was definitely thought of as the black sheep because he just kind of did everything wrong and pissed everybody off. And what I think is strange is I'm kind of looked upon that way as well, the shit starter. And I'm like, I don't think I'm being a shit starter, but their attitude is don't disturb our, we all think this way, so we must be right because we outnumber you.
Yep.
So don't start shit, but you need to like sit there and just take what we're giving. And I was just like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
I'm going to push back. I'll be nice. I'm not going to call people names, and I'm not going to yell and scream. I have done that, but I'm gonna try to talk to you.
You've seen my Facebook. I have a hard time dealing with people.
Yeah.
So the funny thing about a black sheep, I always had this joke, like, if you don't know who the black sheep of the family is, it's you. If you're looking around going, who is it? I'm like, it's probably you. What was your perspective on mental health growing up versus now?
Well, I'm Cajun, and it's a kind of a poor, rooted in like kind of a poor peasant culture. Of course, Cajuns are not all poor now, but they tend to have, be rooted in that whole thing where, you're a man, you don't cry, you don't talk about feelings, that,
Yep.
that whole thing. So it wasn't great. But as I was getting older and just, I was curious, so I would, read books by Sigmund Freud and Nietzsche and all these things. And I started to really warm up to the idea of, therapy and therapists. And my parents were always a little skeptical of that. What they were into, though, was personal development. And this is where I think kind of that personal development thing kind of goes, a little too far off in a direction of like, these supplements are going to cure you. And my parents were kind of into that. That whole idea of, like you don't need doctors and all that. They weren't that far. We went to doctors and all that. But now it's gotten so bad that I'm a little
That line has
concerned
been
about that.
pushed.
Right. So
So
there's that side of personal development where, you could go off that edge of, not accepting reality. So they were
I
on that
used
kind of
to
personal development edge.
I used to make my own colloidal silver back in the day. And that stuff, I think there's definitely medical applications for silver outside of the body. I don't know if there's much evidence for it being used in the body, but I know they've used it for like band-aids. Silver can help heal things, but versus drinking it to get rid of
Doesn't that
a,
turn your skin blue?
yeah, I was drinking it in copious amounts. I think there's other risk factors for causing people to turn blue. There's a guy here on the island, a homeless guy, that's very, very blue from it. It doesn't sound like it might be too toxic on the body, other than you're gonna look like a Smurf.
To get instant access to the newest episodes of the podcast and the first 3 chapters of Antonio's newest book, go to www.escapingtherabbithole.com and enter your first name and best email and smash the button that says "Get the podcast."
What are some of the rules you have for your relationships? Like, what are some boundaries that you're not gonna let be pushed or crossed?
I guess when I was a kid, I saw so much hypocrisy. My parents were very religious, and they would preach, one thing, and then I would see them violate that. And my father also followed, and this is Catholic. My father followed this guy who had this control over people. I mean, he was very, I guess, charismatic, but also narcissistic. And he wasn't a priest or anything. He had a really large family, and he just and I knew one of the tactics he would do because I witnessed it several times, which was he would create a riddle, and since he created it, he knew the answer to it, right? And so, and South Louisiana, where I'm from, is very Catholic. Okay, so you have a lot of Catholics, and he would sort of call them out for not being the good Catholics that they should be, and they're like, "Well, I go to church." And he's like, "That's bare minimum. You need to do more than that." That was his way of, like, he was very staunch, and he would get talking to people, and then he would throw one of those riddles at them. And I wish I could remember them. I think I do remember one of them. Uh, and so it would completely tie this person's brain in a knot. And what do we hate? We absolutely hate confusion, right?
Yes.
We hate chaos and confusion. Your unconscious, especially, is always trying to avoid chaos and confusion and looking for clarity, and something stable to
That's why people
hold
like
on to.
puzzles so much. They get into a puzzle and then they're like, "Oh, I gotta solve it."
But the thing about a puzzle is like you always know you can turn it off. It's kind of like what Hitchcock was saying about horror movies. Like somebody asked him why do people like horror movies? And he says, well, it's like a roller coaster. You know you're safe. So you can scare yourself and know you're safe at the same time. But for when you can tie someone's brain up in a knot with a riddle, they get so pulled into that they don't really have a sense of like, this is just a riddle. It's just words. I can just pull out of this. They don't have that sense of that. And so he would tie that person's brain in a knot, and then they would be begging for mercy because they're in this state of confusion. And then he would hand them the answer.
He loved
And
that control.
yeah, and then the person thought that he just enlightened them. He just freed them. And it was like, well, yes and no. He only freed you from the confusion he put in your brain to begin with. There was no confusion before that. And really, it's just a riddle. It's just words. It's just, these are just concepts. But the person doesn't realize all that. And so if he did that enough times, you start to think, oh, this person knows something. This person is enlightened. He knows the way. And so people would follow him as a result of that. And my dad was one of them. And it was always like, and I think my dad was just going through his own existential crisis. He didn't understand why he wasn't happy. He thought Catholicism was the answer. And then if the Catholicism's the answer, well, then you go and, talk to the sage in town who knows it all about Catholicism. And it happened to be this guy. And my dad, it just made my dad more miserable. I remember him, starting to follow him, and then things just got worse and worse. And, and then at the same time, they're saying, and this is the only way to be happy. You need to follow this religion. You need to follow what he's saying. And this is the only way to be happy. And I'm like, I'm looking around, it's like, nobody looks happy.
No.
Everybody looks like they're miserable. And so it was that constant contradiction
Was it like a
that,
push? Was it like a push pull kind of thing?
yeah, like, oh, you're not happy, then just because you're not doing this, strictly enough, and it was like, it was just, so my dad tried harder and harder. He tried to clamp down on us even harder and harder. And it's like, can't you see that this is making things worse? And I could see that. And I think, even my mother could see that, but she was still kind of going along with it. And anyway, eventually my dad broke from him, and it wasn't until I was in college that he finally broke from him, and things got really good between us. Like I started having a great relationship with especially my dad, and we did a lot of repairing, and I was happy to do that. So uh, when Trump came along, my dad didn't like him at first, like most conservatives, like most Republicans,
Oh yeah.
and
Did it
then
become? Was it? Sorry for interrupting. Was it like a becoming addicted to the rage kind of thing?
yeah, well, I think what my dad followed was, I think this, I don't want to get too much into like my grandparents and all that, but in
Yeah.
general, I think he sought after like a strong male figure. And that's why he ended up with this first guy that I mentioned. And so I thought once he broke with him, I was like, ding dong, the Wicked Witch is dead. We're free. We can just be ourselves. And he could still be Catholic, and he can still be conservative and Republican. And I'm not those things, but we can look past those things. No problem. And we really cultivated a great relationship. And this went on for like 15 years. Things were really good between us. And then Trump comes along, and right away, my dad doesn't like him because he's so immoral. And my dad is a very moral person who follows his faith and all that. And then I remember talking to him on one week, and then the next week I called and we were talking, and he had completely flipped for Trump. Not only that, like he was angry at the Republican Party for not having supported Trump sooner. I was like, you weren't supporting Trump sooner. What the hell just happened here? So
Did
in
he,
that time, and within a span of one week, he completely flipped.
did he ever tell you what it was? Were you ever pinpoint like what was the deciding factor?
Nothing that was satisfying. I mean, I certainly asked him quite, I was like, what? And I mean, it broke my heart, and I couldn't even understand it at first. Like, I didn't understand why I was so angry about this. I'm able to articulate it now because I just gave you kind of the history. I
Yeah.
didn't connect all these things at first. I was just like, what? And, and the other thing too, I think I was upset about it. It was like, you dragged me through your existential crisis. You
Yeah.
pushed all this morality. I mean, it was morality, morality, morality. And now you just start totally throw that stuff out. And now you're going for the most immoral person to ever come, set foot in the White House. And like my mind was just blown. I was just like, this doesn't make any sense. And I even credit my father for really helping me establish good morals, because he was always a very moral person. And my father was always a healthy skeptic. If you brought something to him, he was like, well, what does science say about this? He had that sort of sense of skepticism. I think that's where I got mine from. So to see him just go all in with this guy, I was just, I mean, I was confused. I'll say I was confused probably for a good year or two. And then I actually did some therapy around it. And I was able to finally start putting it together why this had messed with me so much. And it killed all the work that we had done, all the repairing that we had done. I thought all those things had been healed, but actually what happened was it just ripped all those wounds wide open. And the way I look at it is he had a relapse, very much like my younger brother kept relapsing with
Oh,
drugs.
yeah, because there's dopamine involved in this kind of
For
stuff.
sure. For sure.
What's one thing you think people get wrong about conspiracy theorists?
Well, I guess it depends on if you know any, like closely, like family. I would say uh, what people probably get wrong is they kind of think of them as not really human and not able to carry on a productive life. If like I said, now some people they have family members. In fact, I would say it's probably more common now than not common to have family members who are conspiracy theorists, just because it's so prevalent now. Uh, you
The
know,
internet's everywhere.
Right. If you met my father, you'd like him. He's a good guy, and he's, very loving, caring person. But something flips, man, whenever Trump comes up, or I was questioning on him on a few things. I had a conversation with him a few days ago, and things that are facts, undeniable facts. And I was putting that in front of him, and he was just getting really angry because it was, testing his beliefs about Trump. And I was just like, look, Trump wouldn't even deny this if you put it in front of him, because it happened, and
Yeah.
there's video on it. This is not for dispute. But it's amazing to me how many of these conspiracy theorists lead such normal lives otherwise. I think there's a tendency to think, and this is probably the way that I thought, is that your typical conspiracy theorist was like an incel who never went out of their home and just sat in front of a computer all the time. But that is not the case. I mean, they're pretty much everywhere.
I think there are a lot of incel types because it because then you get like the manosphere, you get like the Peterson types, you get Andrew Tate types, and those ones are attracting those people. I think a lot of people think of conspiracy theorists as stupid. I mean, so I almost said as an active conspiracy theorist. Let me reframe that. As a former conspiracy theorist, I definitely grew up with beliefs that I was stupid. A lot of depression, etc. One this kind of ties in. What what do you think are some of the psychological factors that pull people into conspiracy theorists?
That's a good question, because I think it's changed, and I've read articles about this. It used to be that it was a compensation for something that was missing in their lives. That was the most, and I'm probably oversimplifying that theory, but it was something along those lines. Because really, by the time you realize somebody, it used to be like maybe 15 years ago. By the time you realize like somebody was a conspiracy theorist, it made sense, because they were really extreme a lot, in multiple ways in their lives. And
Are you
now
saying are you saying that it can change for the person over time?
that, or I think we have a lot more conspiracy theorists who are that way for more reasons than just that initial one, that there was something, like feeling like there was something really missing in their lives. And it's expanded. It's not that it's not that anymore. That certainly is a factor, but they discovered another factor. It's just that it's more interesting to them. It's sort of like watching WWE wrestling or watching soap operas. They kind of
Life
know it's fake, but it's more
life is
interesting.
life is boring. Life can be
Yeah.
boring. I've heard copywriter John Carlton say this, that hey, like your audience life is boring, give them something. Give them a lot of copywriting is infotainment.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And so, well, for my brother and my father, I think that's a combination of both. I think there are some missing things in their lives, and they're trying to. It's like eating fast food, and your body or your mind thinks you're nourishing yourself, but in fact, there's no nutrients in that. But it feels right. It
Yeah.
tastes like food. It looks like food. It goes in your body. It's okay, but there's no nutrients in it. And so
It's
the
food, but it's
information.
not. It's food, but it's not really packed with a whole lot of
No, you
nutrients.
can't. You're if you just that's all you eat, then you're going to corrode inside, and that's what's happening with information out there. The so-called news, it's like this isn't factual information. It's fast food, so it titillates you, but it's not actually nourishing your mind and nourishing your understanding of what's going on in the world.
And it's what's hilarious with that metaphor about the fast food? What does Trump eat?
Nothing but fast food. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, nothing but. Now, I'm gonna do a little shameless plug for my book, Converting Conspiracy Theorists. In chapter 2, what I see as pulling people into conspiracy theorists, I call it the FAME model, FAME, which is kind of interesting because I think a lot of like me at the time, like I wanted to be that person, like, hey, look what I have. I've got this information. Um, FAME, it stands for feeling powerless. At least I don't know if this is for any other conspiracy theorists. This resonates for me. It was feeling powerless and helpless at the time.
Hmm.
A is apophenia. That's the psychological concept where you're connecting dots everywhere, which is common for every conspiracy theorist.
Very true. Very true.
M is misinformation, which is pretty much everywhere.
Hmm.
Every conspiracy theorist, I'm going to say 99% of conspiracy theorists get introduced to it via a video or a question. Somebody's like, hey, Alex Jones will say something like, if they've lied to you about 9/11, what else have they lied to you about? And you're, and then you kind of go down that rabbit hole. And then
Hmm.
E is external locus of control. And you're aware of a
Yep.
locus of
Yep.
control.
No, I'd say you covered it. It's because as you were mentioning, I was like, yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see that. Like, I think, yeah, that especially the very first one about the helplessness. I think a lot of people are trying to they have this sense that like what's going on, what seems obvious and apparent, there's always something deeper going on. And I think it's also about like they don't want to get surprised or thrown a curveball, and so it's about really trying to find more certainty and clarity. The funny thing is like it's a paradox. Like they're actually creating more uncertainty and
Yes.
more paranoia by going down that. But the idea, I think their intention is to sort of grab onto something more clear, more substantial.
And to
But
help people. Because no conspiracy, like anti-vaxxers, although they're doing a horrible thing, they think they're helping people. They think they're keeping kids safe.
yeah, and you see that a lot in cults too. That's it's this idea that there's some like um altruistic mission going on. With QAnon, it's they're doing it for the kids. And but a lot of people who have gone into QAnon and come back out, they say that is just a ruse on the surface. Like that has
And they have
nothing to
not
do with what they
saved.
actually do.
I interviewed this guy, the ex conspiracy theorist. Like he said, they haven't like show us one kid that QAnon has saved. None.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah,
No,
that whole like I know what's really going on. Like oftentimes when I've talked to conspiracy theorists, that like they have that attitude, like, and you don't know, and like I could try to explain it to you, but you wouldn't understand. And that's a one way for me to. They want you to say, oh no, please explain it to me.
it's that puzzle.
Mhm.
I think going back to that puzzle where you're confused, and then they'll give you that information.
Is your mental and emotional health being affected by a loved one trapped in conspiracy theories? If so, discover how Antonio can help you set clear boundaries and reclaim your mental well-being. Book your free 20-minute consultation call by going to www.escapingtherabbithole.com/call. That's escapingtherabbithole.com/CALL.
What does escaping the rabbit hole mean to you?
Like I'm assuming you're applying that to conspiracy theories.
Yeah, or conspiracy theories, or being in a family where there's conspiracy theories, whatever's I guess more relevant for you.
Yeah, and so I'm fallible like anyone else, and I would have to say I have gone down rabbit holes, just not the conspiracy theory rabbit hole.
You were
I
down
think it
were sorry for were you down I just thought of this. Were you down like a depression rabbit hole at one point?
I would call that a rabbit hole for sure.
Okay.
Like just always seeing the worst in the world and the worst in myself and on and on and on. And it's amazing too how there could be people in your life who are supposed to be your partner, your protector, your advocate, and you're supposed to be the same for them, but they know this about you. They know your buttons, they know your sensitivities, and they use them against you in a very passive aggressive way. And that's why like I've done videos about passive aggressiveness and narcissism because man, those people are really good at finding your sensitivities, your buttons, and then pushing
Yeah.
them to manipulate you. And you don't even realize it's them doing it. Like that's how crafty they are. And I would say, I remember having, well, I don't want to incriminate anybody, but having had a very strong experience with someone who was very passive aggressive, manipulating me, followed by a very strong experience by someone who's very narcissistic, who did use passive aggressiveness, but a lot of other tactics to manipulate me. And after I came out of that, I was like, how did I even get there to begin with? And what I started to realize is that I allowed my vulnerabilities to be a little too exposed, and they jumped right onto them. But a normal person wouldn't do that to someone else.
A
These were not normal
sociopath. A
people.
sociopath would.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, so escaping the rabbit hole. I mean, I think you have to become ungrounded to go into the rabbit hole to begin with. So, and that's a kind of a vague thing to say, but I think the best thing is to know who you are, and in order to know who you are, you got to know what you want, and you got to have enough experience of knowing how to get what you want. And then it's this interesting thing where that really reveals who you are to yourself. Once I got there, I knew at that point, like, there's no way that somebody could do what these other two people had done to me. That would never happen again. Not saying that I could never be fooled again. I mean, we're all human, so I can be fooled again. But that kind of manipulation, there's no way because I'm just way too grounded in who I am and what I want and how to go about doing that to ever let that happen again.
No. So I know we might have to do a second follow-up podcast. Your website is selfconcept.com.
Yep.
Can you share, I guess, a simple tool that people um can start to, I guess, build better what's it, boundaries? The one thing I liked from your program was first program was the idea of identifying a trait. Like I know I'm a kind person. You know, we were a
Mhm.
caregiver for an elderly neighbor, and I remember
Mhm.
when in your program you basically had us ask ourselves, how do I know I'm a kind person? And in your program you talk about how these qualities are built up from like different experiences, memories. I remember seeing like a collage of me helping people throughout my life.
Mhm.
So I don't know if there's, because I mean self concept, it's not something you can teach in 5 minutes. It's
No.
big. I guess what can you any simple tools you can comment on that, or
Sure. Values elicitation. It's a very easy tool. On my videos, especially the ones I've done about values elicitation, I give a free PDF on how to do that. So it's where everything starts.
and I will have a link. If you give me if you tell me the link later below or above this video, I'll have a link to
Okay.
the values
Yeah,
elicitation. Yeah,
definitely.
can you describe what the values elicitation is and like how it can help somebody?
Yeah. So what we think we want is just the surface of what we want. Nothing has inherent value. It only has the value that we project onto it. And that's what we call a value. And Steve Andreas defined a value as a generalization about an experience that is important to you. If you've had happy experiences in your life and you like them and you want more of them and they're important to you, then happiness is a value. Same thing with kindness, same thing with joy, passion, freedom, all of those. So like let's say money, you say, okay, I want $1 million. Nobody really wants $1 million. You want what you think $1 million will get you. And when you ask that question, what will $1 million do for me? That's when you start opening the door to reaching what your values are. Values are mostly unconscious. They drive every decision that you make, every choice that you make, and every behavior that you engage in. So everything you do, every choice, every decision, every behavior is an attempt to fulfill a value, possibly more than one value at a time. And so when you understand that about the things that you want, the game really starts to change. And how this happens first is like, I can't tell you how many times that I've worked with a person, coaching them, and that's how we always start the conversation. What do you want? There's a reason you're coming to me for coaching. So what is it that you want? And they'll tell me like, I want I want this, I want a job promotion, or, I want to do more in sales or whatever. And once we elicit the values, and then we go back to the original goal, and I would say, do you think this goal is actually going to fulfill those values for you? And they go, no, not
No.
at all, not even close. And I'll say, well, how do you think you arrived at those? And that's where all the external locus of control comes in. The values of your society, the values of your culture, the values of your parents, who all told you, hey, this is really important. You need to be a lawyer. You need to be a doctor. Any of those things. And there's some really unhappy lawyers and doctors. Trust me, I know, I've coached them.
Yeah.
So they did what they were told was important, but it wasn't really important to them. What's really important to you is your own personal values. And so criteria for those values is how you go about fulfilling those values. So it's also important to know your criteria for your values. And no one can give you that. That has to come from within. You have to discover that. And it may even take you exploring that, especially if I don't know, if you're listening to this and you're in your 20s, chances are you don't really know what will fulfill your values. And so that's why you're young, so that you can take the time to go and explore that and try a lot of different things. And then as it relates to boundaries, we can call it an imaginary boundary around us. It's imaginary because yes, we are creating it, but feels just as real as anything else, because when people violate that boundary, it's like when someone walks up to you too fast, and you don't know the person, what do? We back up. We want our personal space. They triggered that boundary. So becoming aware of that boundary and becoming aware of the positive intention behind that boundary. Boundaries are meant to protect you, but understanding it even better than that. And then you can then decide the way the boundary is fashioned. Is it really getting you what you want? Is it useful, or can it be changed, or is it even necessary? So yeah, you can play around with boundaries quite a bit, and that's a little more involved. The values elicitation would be the fastest, easiest thing that you could learn.
I in my second book, Coping with Conspiracy Theorists, it's more of like a self-care guide for family members of conspiracy theorists. More of a self-help guide, which is much more enjoyable. It enjoyable for me to write. I think chapter 13 or 14, I talk about boundaries, and I basically just created two NLP, or not create two techniques, basically a visualization for people to identify what I call their hidden boundaries are. I think the boundary, I basically had them having them imagine closing their eyes and have them imagine somebody that comes up into their personal space that they like versus somebody they don't like, to notice like how we how that how we elicit in our imagination.
Mm. Yeah, we tend to include, or anything we include in our boundaries, we tend to be in good rapport with, we feel very familiar and trusting with. Anything outside of our boundaries, just the opposite, like we don't feel connected at all. And we do this all the time for everything. Like, we'll hear about a plane crash that happened in, say, Asia. And we'll go, oh man, that's terrible. And then they'll say there were two Americans on board. And we'll go, because what do? We
Man,
automatically
you just
include them
made
in
me
that.
feel like a bad person.
We all
And
do it. But the reason we do it is because we say, oh, American, that generalization, we put them inside our boundary. And you
yeah,
can chunk it down even more. Like, I hear about something that happens in this country, and I'm like, oh man, that's terrible, it's tragic. And they say, and they were from New Orleans, and I'm like, oh no, like, so
yeah,
it's, again, it gets even closer. And we do this with football teams. We're very tribal like that. So it's just good to understand that. I don't think you're wrong for doing that, but it's just good to understand that. And one of the things that Steve Andreas had pointed out was, when we were fighting the Cold War, any country that simply said that they were not communists, we included them in our boundary, which meant that we ended up giving aid to and aligning with some of the worst dictators to ever
yes.
exist, simply because they said they were not communist. And that was a failing, on this country's part.
Well, look what's happening with the idea of, if it was Antifa, but now I don't know who the boogeyman is. That was like the deep state. Now it's like the trans. And if somebody's like, oh no, this is a good way to put it. I interviewed a gay guy whose husband was in QAnon, which is mind-boggling. Just like when I find a fellow Mexican that's in that's a Trump supporter, I'm like, how are you doing this? If that makes any sense, it's kind of similar. It's like, what?
Yeah.
How are you doing this? I think that I had interviewed that gay guy, and I asked him if he thought it was like a thing of his ex-husband being like, I'm not one of those bad gay guys. I'm one of the good ones.
Mhm.
Almost trying to say like I'm not a communist. I'm a good person.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of those things are surprising me too, but I think it has a lot to do with media and people are drawing their boundaries based on the tribalism of like right versus left and that sort of thing. And what gets crazy is that a lot of my family buys into that and they will post things on Facebook and I'm like, okay, I am a registered Democrat. I don't identify with the party that much. I don't have a problem. I would vote outside of my party if I found a candidate, but you realize you're talking about killing me
Yeah,
because I'm a
you're
Democrat?
not eating babies, right?
Yeah, or yeah, just weird things like that. I was like, okay, do you realize? Well, we're not talking about you, but it's like, yeah, you kind of are.
Yeah.
Like, and I've had to have that very uncomfortable conversation. But again, I'm not going to pretend, and I'm so that they can feel better about their messed up beliefs. I'm going to put this in their face, and um, maybe that helps, maybe it doesn't. But yeah, I'm not going to back down from those things. And somebody has to do the tough love thing. I feel like somebody has to bring the reality to them because nobody else is.
You definitely need to get a copy of How to Have Impossible Conversations. Oh, so good.
It does sound fascinating. I'll have to look into that for sure.
It's basically a lot of Socratic questioning, and one of the questions I like in there I always bring it up is it's a scaling question. It might be from motivational interviewing. It's on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you in the belief that Democrats are trying to kill babies? And then the book says if it's a really high number, it's a good chance it's a moralistic belief. So no amount of evidence is going to work.
Mhm.
If they're like, oh, it's like a 7, then oh, why didn't you choose a 6 or a 5? Then they have to kind of double down.
Well, that's where you get those good questions. I see you arguing with people on Facebook from time to
Yeah,
time, and I was like, man, that's a good question. I've even stolen some of your questions
yeah.
because they're really good. Did you get kicked off of Facebook, or you seem to have, or maybe I'm just not seeing the conversation. Sometimes I
Maybe
don't.
no, no. I'm no. During 2020, I mean, I was booted so many times. What?
Yeah, I
So
remember you complaining about it.
at the beginning of it was at 2020. It was bef right before the Andreas camp. They were starting to do core transformation trainings again. They were looking for like they're going to start a practice group. I had been off Facebook. I used core transformation to get off Facebook. It was off for like 2 months. It was peaceful. I got an email and it was from Mark Andreas saying, "Hey, come and find a practice partner." I'm like, "Oh God, should I? Let me open Facebook." As soon as I open it, holy shit, like panic attacks. I'm just seeing like QAnon, and I'm like, "Oh my God, this is a horrible idea. I should not have done this."
Hmm.
I got booted off
I
Facebook for calling somebody an uneducated potato.
Oh man, that you're going to hell for that one.
Yeah.
I have one. I want to try it out on you. And I've actually used this once and it worked pretty well. So let's do a little role play here.
Okay.
So let's say this is just a role play. I want you to pretend like you believe the election was stolen. You're a Trump supporter who believes the last election was
It,
stolen. Okay.
but it
All right.
was.
Okay, good. All right. So if Trump came out today and said, "Hey, I lied about the whole thing. The election wasn't stolen." Would you still continue to believe that the election was stolen, or would you believe Trump and say, "Okay, the election wasn't stolen, it was fair"?
I think 100% I would still believe it because the deep state is forcing him to do that.
Okay. So the reason you believed the election was stolen was because Trump said so. So even in the face of irrefutable evidence, the guy who made up the lie, if he came out and said, "I lied," you still wouldn't believe it. So that means that no matter what evidence, no matter what came out, how true it is, there is just no way you would ever believe that the election wasn't stolen.
Yeah. Okay. I'm having some cognitive dissonance here. I got steam blowing on my ears. I think one reason that Trump said that is he wanted to identify the people in the deep state, the enemy, the people that we need to watch out for.
Yes, but you wouldn't even think that the election wasn't stolen had Trump not said so. So the guy who got you to believe it is now saying, I didn't say it. I mean, I didn't mean it. I lied. So if you would still believe that the election was stolen, that means no matter what, no matter if it wasn't stolen, and then we could prove this empirically, you would still believe that the
I,
election was stolen.
I probably would.
Okay, so that's just it. This is not about truth for you. It's about your belief and you clinging to that belief. You're admitting
Yeah.
that. Okay. So I had this I asked this question to my father. And so he switched, and I knew he was going to switch. So what I want you to do now is I want you to see how crazy that is just to hold on to a belief, even though it's been proven incorrect, and then switch to no, I would stop believing it if he said it.
Okay. Oh, that was a weird role play. I had to like kind of put myself in. Okay, so I'm gonna be. What am I gonna be? I'm gonna be
The person who would stop believing it if Trump
Okay.
said he lied.
Okay.
So I would say if Trump came out and said he lied about the election being stolen, would you then stop believing that the election was stolen? You'd believe it was actually a free and fair election.
It'd be hard for me to admit that. Admitting that I was wrong would be hard. I might, but I'd have to go slowly at first. I might not post it on Facebook. I might just admit it, but not be very vocal about it.
Okay. So what you're saying then is facts don't aren't true to you. It's this one man, Trump, whatever he says is truth to you. So he can say one thing one day and you're going to believe it's truth. And then tomorrow he could say the exact opposite. And then now that's your new truth. So truth isn't facts and reality. Truth is whatever comes out of Trump's mouth.
I guess so.
Okay. So I did this with my dad. And of course, he hated both conclusions, but couldn't deny either. And he actually switched midway. He goes, oh, no, if Trump said it, then I. And so, and then he finally got so frustrated. He said, well, then what's the right answer? And I said, the right answer is that the election wasn't stolen.
He
And
wasn't
so,
having that one.
so I kind of did with that guy with the puzzle that I was telling you about. So I set it up to make it seem like, I'm really getting your answer, but there is no right answer because it's a false question to begin with. The election wasn't stolen; it was a lie. So no matter what they answer, you want to take it to whatever extreme, and then they go, "Ooh, I don't like that," and they want to switch, and then they finally go throw their hands up in the air, and they're like, "Well, what is it?" And it's like the election wasn't stolen. Neither one is correct. Of course, you know.
What are 2 to 3 other people you would recommend that I interview? If you can think of anybody off the top of your head.
Well, uh,
Is your mental and emotional health being
Rasmussen.
affected by a
Did you
loved
see that
one
video I
trapped
did
in
with him?
conspiracy theories?
I was
If
surprised,
so,
'cause he,
discover how Antonio can help you set
would be a
clear
good
boundaries
interview.
and
I know
reclaim
he
your mental
definitely leans on the
well-being.
right.
Book your
Yeah, he's a
free
libertarian.
20-minute consultation call by going to
And we've had some knockdown I wouldn't say arguments, 'cause he always keeps a
www.escapingtherabbithole.com
level
That's
head, and so do I, too.
escapingtherabbithole.com
But,
/CALL.
Yeah, so they're very freaking logic.
yeah, and so, but he had a lot of things wrong because, like, we were sitting in London, and he brought this up. I was kind of surprised. He's like, if I lived in America and I was able to vote, I would vote for Trump rather than Biden. And I was like, okay, please explain. And he everything that he was saying, he really got wrong. He was like, well, the Black Lives Matter riots and stuff that happened under Biden. I was like, no, it didn't. That happened under Trump. And so, yeah, he was getting a lot of things wrong. And then, uh, so we continued the conversation by phone, like leaving each other voice messages. And I was like, I just kept calling out, where's your evidence? Where's your evidence? He's a very well-read person. And so he does actually, look for stuff and bases his opinions on
Oh, he will
usually
change his beliefs.
he will change his beliefs. And so I was really calling him out, and I think he hadn't explored a lot of this stuff in a while. And how I know that is he started to back up his points. He started sending me videos, John Stossel videos. He's a fan of John Stossel.
Oh, okay.
Started sending me videos of
Libertarian makes sense.
right of before Biden was elected and what Stossel and this other so-called expert thought Biden was going to do, and because that's what they thought he was going to do, they were voting for Trump. And I was like, Jurgen, this was more than 3 years ago. We know Biden didn't do these things because he's been president for 3 years.
Yeah.
Like, so there was things like that. And I think he just hadn't updated, his knowledge base. He just kind of went, okay, this is how it is. This is how I think, and just rolled with it. And then now I was calling it out, and he started to change his mind on a few things.
Okay.
So he will change his mind if
So,
you
okay.
show him the evidence. But
I
he's
mean,
not a conspiracy theorist either. He doesn't. I mean, he believes Trump is a narcissist, and he's not a Trumper, but he would vote for him. That's what I thought was crazy.
So I guess I'll interview him. What I know, like one other or two other people you would think of, even if not inside the hypnosis community, maybe with inside mental health, the broader thing, maybe it's somebody that does like a cult deprogram or anything.
No, but I can tell you who I've been rolling around in my head about asking to interview him. And then one of the reasons why I thought this is because his videos, his live streams don't get a lot of views on YouTube, but he is very well known, and it's Alan Lichtman, the guy who created the keys. He actually predicted that Trump was going to win. He's predicted every presidential person elected. He's man, talk about a smart dude, and he's liberal. He caught a lot of flack for predicting that Trump was going to win, but it was his keys and patterning. That's an
Who brought
NLP.
him up? Vincent Blow's the one that told me about him.
Oh, yes. Okay, yeah.
He's the one that originally told me about keys. Like, yeah, he's like, don't worry. He's like, Biden's gonna win. I was terrified.
Yeah.
Well, here.
Yeah, when I was waiting on Alan Lichtman to come out with his prediction, and when he did that Biden was going to win, I was like, and right now he's not ready to call the keys just yet. He's just saying right now it's in Biden's favor, but things can happen between now and then. So, but I think he'd be reachable because his following on YouTube is very, very small, and his son seems to be helping him out, and it's gone mediocre. But I don't know if he would have a lot to add to the conversation about conspiracy theorists, but election politics, history. Yeah. He's a history professor.
I should. You know who else I want to get on the podcast? Lakoff?
Yes. Well, that guy's smart. Yeah.
Yeah, he's right. Rob, Democrats suck at framing messages. What's it called? The idea of it was global warming, but it's climate change. A lot of Republicans like, oh, why? We're just going to change it to climate change. They thought it was liberals. It was the GOP that changed it to climate change. I don't know if you know that. George. Oh no, I'm sorry. Let me backtrack it. So it was George Luntz. He's a think tank guy for the Republicans.
Yeah, isn't it Fred Luntz or
Frank? No, it's Frank Luntz. Frank Luntz. That's it.
Frank Luntz, yeah.
Frank Luntz. They figure out that climate change sounds natural. It doesn't sound threatening versus global warming.
I thought the liberals had done that to soften the whole thing, but yeah, that makes sense. You wanted to understand what the threat is.
Yeah.
Oh no, it wasn't a person. I wanted to. This is the first time I heard this. Maybe you have heard it arguing with anti-vaxxers. I was arguing with an anti-vaxxer, and I referred to him as an anti-vaxxer. And normally, anti-vaxxers don't push back against that. But I've been noticing Robert Kennedy doesn't want to be called an anti-vaxxer, even though he absolutely is. It's so 100%. Funny. He'll say in the same sentence, I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but there's no such thing as a safe vaccine. It's like, you're an anti-vaxxer. And you wouldn't say that.
Yeah.
You weren't an anti-vaxxer. So I was arguing with this guy on Facebook, and I referred to him as an anti-vaxxer. And he goes, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. And I was like, oh, yeah, you are. And I said,
I've seen that a lot.
But I said, well, what are you? He said he's a pro-immune, pro-science. What is that? Pro-immunity science or something like that.
Pro-natural immunity?
Didn't even say natural. He just said immune science. I'm pro-immune science.
Pro-death?
Yeah. And I was like, oh no, you're not allowed to rebrand yourself. You're an anti-vaxxer. And
Oh,
that's the
that's
way
right. I
they're
see
going
where
to
you're going
refer
with
to
that thread, how they are. It's like, oh,
They're trying to rebrand themselves. Because
I'm not an anti-vax. Oh, that's similar to the redefine with sleight of mouth.
yeah. And so they know that anti-vaxxer sounds crazy. So now they're trying to change it to like pro-immune science or something like that.
Dude, thank you. This has been great. And I'm looking at my time like, whoa, it's funny. I live 5 minutes from work and I'm always like barely making I should work on my tardiness. Thank you for jumping on, and I
My
might want to
pleasure.
do a follow-up on
Sure.
more of the stuff that you can help people with. Website is selfconcept.com. And if anybody looks above this video, below it, wherever on this website, I will have a link to some of his stuff. Check his stuff out. If you want to be able to create better boundaries with your family, he's the man that can help.
It might be interesting to have Jurgen and I on the same time and get us arguing.
That, I think we might have to do that. Might have to do that.
That would be interesting. I like him. I respect him, and he is a really good guy. You should watch the video I did, The Most Dangerous Man in Personal Development.
I think I saw a little bit of it.
It's built up like a horror movie in the beginning.
Yeah.
And we went to Norway and interviewed him, but of course he's there with his family, his
Oh
kids.
yeah, and it's a kind of creepy vibe. Yeah, I do. I have to check it out.
Yeah, no, he is a good guy. Like I'm not trying to tear him down or anything like that. He's a good guy.
Thank you for jumping on, and let's do another follow-up one.
Sure. All right. Thank you for having me on. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Escaping the Rabbit Hole. To get instant access to the newest episodes of the podcast and the first 3 chapters of Antonio's newest book, go to www.escapingtherabbithole.com and enter your first name and best email and smash the button that says Get the Podcast.